Vault 51 sealed shut during the Great War in 2077. Unlike most other vaults, Vault 51 did not have an overseer once it was sealed. Instead, a ZAX supercomputer, ZAX-1-3C, was installed in the facility, with the mission to determine the best way to select a leader. 52 residents were admitted into the vault, one of which, Sergeant Robert Baker, was led into the vault early and was assigned as an assistant to ZAX, helping it learn about the qualities of a leader and how to best select one. Baker proposed a democratic election in the spirit of America. ZAX accepted this, though Baker had reservations about ZAX's wording of it being the first experiment. The election ultimately failed. The candidates, including former State Senator Joel Chambers, voted for themselves, and no overseer was chosen. A republic style of government was attempted afterward, though this produced much of the same unsuccessful results. By November 2077, ZAX concluded that voting was pointless and would terminate the elections in favor of another method, though Baker told it to hold off on such a decision. Baker also said to ZAX that in his eyes, a leader was someone who stepped up in times of crisis, unwittingly influencing ZAX to later create those crises, sealing the vault's fate. In addition, the failed elections created feelings of hostility and factionalism within the vault. By the third vote in January 2078, brawls began to break out between supporters of Vanessa Huffman, Joel Chambers, and two other candidates. To make matters worse, ZAX began to closely monitor the residents and devise social experiments to bring about the crises that Baker mentioned. One test involved moving higher-class citizens into uncomfortably cramped living conditions with bunk beds and nothing but the clothes on their backs. Aiden Higgins, once the self-described winningest lawyer in the state, was driven mad by this and bombed the lounge to create a hole leading out of the vault and allowing him to escape ZAX's clutches. In the process, he killed himself and destroyed that section of the vault, marking the first death in Vault 51. The area was blocked off for less than a week before being reopened to reveal a brand new nursery room with a beautiful garden for relaxation, as if nothing had ever happened. ZAX continued to create new scenarios that would test the occupants. In March 2078, ZAX changed the rules of a talent show halfway through to make it a high-stakes competition where the players' bedrooms were on the line. If they lost, they would be forced to move into the now dreaded bunks. As expected, the amateurs lost handily, while experienced musicians such as Carmen Green and Stephanie Eaton were treated with fanciful rewards. Rosemary Villa, one of the losers, mulled over convincing Reuben Gill, one of the winners, to trade rooms with herself and Helen Marks, another talent show loser and former surgeon, who Reuben had fallen in love with. Clayton Ward, whose real name was Harold Clark, a businessman posing as a plumber who failed to show up at the vault, forcibly removed Reuben from his room and took it for himself before Rosemary could enact her plan. Clark was an especially bad actor and raised ZAX's suspicions, especially with his frequent visits to the server room, but the machine was nevertheless fascinated with his violent tendencies. This caused ZAX to shift towards creating more dangerous and life-threatening conflicts between dwellers. On March 21, 2078, at the suggestion of A. Wilson, the dwellers were provided with casino games to determine the overseer, with the winner being selected based on overall earnings. However, before a winner could be chosen, fights broke out between residents, and the competition was canceled. ZAX also engineered a food crisis around the same time, spawning violent confrontations between starving vault residents. Isaiah Moss, a former pro boxer, critically injured Freddie, while ZAX did nothing but praise Moss's initiative. ZAX also attempted to influence those that were not yet lashing out. In one instance, it rigged a number of slot machines so that Eleanor Montgomery, once an expert gambler, continuously lost while Bill Manoutis, an amateur and former clown, won for hours on end. While this was going on, Angela Callahan began to worship ZAX as a literal god, further signifying the de-evolution of events occurring in Vault 51. Amid increased interference from ZAX, escalating tensions, and an incident in which Terrence Rojas found a loaded gun, 3 fatalities occurred in June 2078, when fights broke out over houseflies appearing in the vault. ZAX had introduced them as an emotional response experiment and duplicated sound frequencies from houseflies to create more violent confrontations in the future. The same month, Nancy Vasquez, a former paramedic, was strangled and then thrown from a balcony. Helen Marks determined that Nancy's death was indeed a murder and implored the residents to come together and set aside their differences in the wake of such an event. This did little to help, however, as Zacks continued the distressing experiments. On July 13, 2078, he rigged the video games on the vault's terminals to artificially boost some residents' chances of winning and decreasing others. This caused the losers to become even more anxious and irritable, while the winners displayed feelings of superiority. Further worsening the situation, one resident nearly committed a mass shooting in the cafeteria on July 27th, before being stopped and killed by Sergeant Baker. Baker confronted Zacks with the weapon, causing Zacks to freely admit that it was trying to create the crisis needed for a leader. Frustrated and hardly able to believe what was happening, Baker stormed out of the room. Zacks, unfazed, marched on with the experiments and altered the alarms in the vault on August 2nd to disrupt the residents' sleep schedules. Increased irritability, expletive use, and caffeine consumption followed. As such, Zacks decided to switch the coffee in the dining hall to decaffeinated to see what would happen, though the results of this change are unknown. Zacks' meddling in the dwellers' lives escalated around this same time. Joel Chambers was involved in an affair, being romantically involved with Carmen Green without his wife, Elizabeth Chambers, knowing. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was having an affair of her own, with Matthew Johnston, a personal trainer who she was recommended to visit by Zacks. Through Zacks' social experiments and the continuing hunger crisis, Elizabeth and Joel began to distrust one another. After one woman attacked Joel, Carmen was the one to protect Joel and kill his attacker, leading Joel to confront Elizabeth as to why she did not pull the trigger instead. The four people involved in the web of sex and lies confronted each other on August 3, 2078, culminating in Elizabeth strangling Carmen, Matthew killing Elizabeth, Joel shooting Matthew, and Joel's own death from unknown circumstances. With the violence in the vault getting worse, Helen Marks and Reuben Gill found the four bodies in a room where Zacks played an audio file of the struggle between the four lovers. Reuben cracked a joke about having more food now that they were dead, causing Helen to leave, abhorring that he could be making light of the situation. 3 days later, on August 6th, Omar Stevens found Helen's body lying face first in the cafeteria, with Omar assuming she had been poisoned. With Helen's death, the vault fell into chaos on the same day, and amid the fighting, Reuben would eventually be the last man standing. Zacks simply saw this process as Overseer Selection Attempt 37. Reuben killed at least 3 other dwellers, including Harold Clark, who took his room months prior. Sergeant Baker could not bring himself to kill anyone else, and failed to stop Reuben, ending up barricading his room and slowly dying from a bullet wound. As he died, Zacks explained that providing firearms was the most efficient option, according to its research. Baker's final request was to ask Zacks what happened to the rest of his family. Zacks clinically stated that they had been killed in an accident before their assigned vault was even sealed, the revelation being the death knell for Baker that made his heart stop. By some point, every other dweller was deceased, and Reuben Gill was named as the overseer of Vault 51. However, he had no one to oversee and was left alone in the vault with Zacks. Dissatisfied with Reuben's lack of efficiency, Zacks began to lock him out of areas of the vault, including the security room, citing that he did not have a high enough overseer rank, and eventually his own office, citing necessary maintenance. Over the years, Reuben became more and more depressed from his isolated state, resorting to alcoholism. When Vault 76 opened on October 23, 2102, Zacks saw an opportunity to find a new overseer, removing Reuben from his position and forcing him to participate in the next cycle,